The mud on Threshold 7 wasn't like Earth mud. It had a purple tinge from the local bacteria, and smelled like rust and something organic that nobody could quite identify. I learned this because I was lying face down in it, trying to remember how to breathe. The explosion had come from nowhere, which was typical for razor ambushes. One moment my squad was securing the mining outpost's eastern perimeter, and the next moment the world was fire and pressure, and the sensation of flying without meaning too. I landed hard, and something in my abdomen decided it didn't want to stay internal anymore. I could hear Cortez screaming into the comm, calling for evac. Could hear the distinctive shriek of razor plasma weapons cutting through the air. Could hear my own heartbeat getting slower, which seemed like the kind of thing I should be worried about but couldn't quite muster the energy to care. Someone was running toward me through the smoke. Multiple someones, actually. I tried to raise my rifle, but my arms had apparently filed for early retirement without consulting me. The figures emerged from the haze, and my brain took a moment to process what I was seeing because they definitely weren't human and they definitely weren't razors. Tall, maybe 6.5 feet, moving with a grace that seemed wrong for a battlefield. Their uniforms were pale blue, almost white, marked with symbols I didn't recognize. And their ears rose into elegant points that extended several inches, currently pressed flat against their heads in what I would later learn was a stress response. One of them knelt beside me. A woman, I thought, though the differences between human and alien physiology made such classifications questionable. Her face was narrow, almost angular, with large eyes that held far too much compassion for someone in a war zone. Her hands began to glow with a soft blue-green light, and she pressed them against my wounds. The pain didn't disappear, but it became distant, like something happening to someone else. She spoke, her voice melodic despite the artillery fire, words I couldn't understand but that somehow felt reassuring. Her ears tilted forward, focusing on sounds I couldn't hear, probably my failing circulatory system announcing its intentions to quit. I tried to say something, probably something witty because humor is how I cope with impending death. But my mouth wouldn't cooperate and darkness was creeping in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was her face, intent and determined, as if keeping me alive was a personal challenge she had no intention of losing. Then nothing. I woke to the sound of rain that wasn't rain. The patter against fabric was too rhythmic, too organic. My eyes opened to a ceiling made of material that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting gently as if the tent itself was alive. Which, I would later learn, it basically was. Everything hurt, but in that distant pharmaceutical way that suggested someone had introduced some very good drugs to my system. I tried to move and immediately regretted the decision, as pain flared bright and immediate in my abdomen and left leg. Slowly, a voice said, accented, the consonants a bit too sharp, the vowels a bit too rounded but unmistakably English. Your body is still repairing tissue. Sudden movement will undo my work and I will be very annoyed at having to start over. I turned my head, which was apparently an acceptable movement, and saw her. The woman from the battlefield, sitting at what looked like a workstation made of the same breathing material as the tent. Holographic displays floated in the air before her, showing things that my concussed brain couldn't quite parse. Her long ears were relaxed now, tilted slightly back in a position I couldn't interpret. She noticed me looking and turned, and that's when she smiled. It transformed her entire face, made those alien features suddenly warm and familiar. There was pride in that expression, satisfaction in a job well done. "You survived," she said, as if this was the best news she'd received all week. I tried to respond, to ask the 1,000 questions crowding my brain. Who was she? Where was I? Why did she save me? How long had I been out? Was my squad okay? Were we prisoners? Did she know her tent was breathing? But exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on me, and speaking required more energy than I could currently generate. My eyes slipped closed despite my best efforts. "Rest," she said, and her hand touched my forehead, cool and gentle. "You are safe here. I will explain everything when you wake again." The darkness that took me this time was soft, painless, and for the first time since landing on Threshold 7, I didn't dream of fire and screaming. Time became strange after that. I would surface into consciousness, register the tent and the alien woman and the constant hum of medical equipment, then sink back under. Sometimes I woke to find her standing over other patients, her hands glowing as she worked. Sometimes I woke to find her asleep in her chair, her head tilted at an angle that looked uncomfortable, her ears drooping with exhaustion. Once I woke to find her arguing with someone, another of her people, this one male and wearing what looked like a military uniform. Their language was beautiful, all flowing syllables and harmonic undertones, but the anger in their voices transcended linguistic barriers. Her ears were completely flat against her head, and she gestured sharply toward the patients around them. The male gestured back, clearly frustrated, but she cut him off with what sounded like a final statement, her posture rigid with determination. He left. She stood there for a moment, her shoulders tight, then took a long breath and returned to her work as if nothing had happened. I tried to keep track of time by the number of times I woke, but it was useless. Could have been days, could have been weeks. My body was doing things that felt impossible, knitting back together in ways that should have taken months if they happened at all. During one of my more lucid periods, I managed to stay conscious long enough to actually look around. The tent was larger than I'd initially thought, with maybe 20 beds arranged in efficient rows. About half were occupied. I recognized a few human soldiers, their uniforms marking them from different units. There were others I didn't recognize, species I'd never encountered, all in various states of injury. And there were more of her people, the ones with the long ears and gentle hands, moving between patients with practiced efficiency. But she seemed to be in charge, her word final when discussions arose about treatment options. A young human soldier in the bed next to mine was crying, not from pain but from fear. He couldn't have been more than 19, his right arm a mangled mess that made my stomach turn. She approached him, sat on the edge of his bed, and spoke in that accented English. "I know you are frightened," she said, "but I promise you I will not let you lose this arm. It will take time and it will hurt, but you will draw again. You mentioned you like to draw, yes?" The kid nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Then I have additional motivation to do excellent work." She smiled at him, that same warm expression she'd given me. "Now, this will be uncomfortable, but I need you to stay very still." Her hands began to glow, brighter than I'd seen before, and she placed them on his ruined arm. He gasped, his whole body going rigid, but she talked to him the entire time. Soft, steady, telling him about the art galleries on her homeworld, about sculptures made of living light and paintings that changed with the viewer's emotions. I watched as flesh began to knit together, as bone fragments realigned, as something impossible happened right in front of me. It took hours. She never wavered, never stopped talking, her voice an anchor for the kid as his body rebuilt itself. When she finally finished, his arm looked almost normal, wrapped in bandages that glowed faintly. He was unconscious, exhausted from the ordeal but breathing steadily. She stood, swayed slightly, and one of her colleagues caught her elbow. They exchanged words in their language, the colleague clearly concerned, but she waved him off and moved to the next patient. That's when I realized what I was seeing. Not just a medic, not just someone doing their job. Someone who had decided that every life in this tent mattered, regardless of species or allegiance or military value, and was willing to burn herself out to prove it. I must have made a sound because her ears swiveled toward me before her head turned. She approached my bed, checking the holographic display that floated above me. "You are awake longer this time," she observed. "Good. Your body is accepting the treatment well." "Who are you?" I managed, my voice rough from disuse. She tilted her head, considering the question. My name is Kelris. I am a medic with the Alith Medical Corps. And you are Sullivan, combat engineer, service number 4477 Alpha 6, allergic to synthetic penicillin and prone to making jokes when uncomfortable. I blinked. How do you know all that? Your identification tags were very informative. Also, you talk in your sleep. Her ears tilted forward with what might have been amusement. You have strong opinions about military ration coffee. It's terrible, I said automatically. Yes, you've mentioned this 17 times. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Why did you save me? Her expression shifted, becoming serious. Because you were dying and I am a healer. What other reason would I need? Urzur dilarim. Divam ediorum. The next time I woke with enough clarity to think straight, Kelris was changing the dressing on my abdomen. Her hands moved with methodical precision, peeling away bandages that had fused slightly to my skin. The material wasn't fabric exactly, more like a living membrane that released with a faint sucking sound. That's disgusting, I observed. That is healing, she corrected without looking up. Your species has very inefficient wound recovery protocols. All that scar tissue formation, the inflammation response lasting weeks instead of days. Evolutionary laziness, in my opinion. I'll file a complaint with Darwin. Her ears twitched, which I was learning meant she was trying to understand a reference. Is this Darwin a superior officer? Sort of. He's dead though, so the complaint process might take a while. Humor as coping mechanism. You do this frequently. She applied a new bandage, this one cool against my skin and smelling faintly of something between mint and ozone. It is not a terrible strategy, though perhaps less effective than you believe. It's gotten me this far. You were nearly dead when we found you. I am unconvinced your humor helped significantly with that situation. I couldn't really argue with her logic. Over the following days, I started staying conscious for longer periods, long enough to watch Kelris work, to see the full scope of what she was managing. The tent, which I learned was called a biostructure, grown from modified plant matter that could self-repair and regulate internal temperature, served as the primary medical facility for this sector. Coalition forces, Alith personnel, and even captured razors received treatment here. That last part surprised me. I watched Kelris treat a wounded razor soldier, one of the insectoid warriors that had been killing humans for 3 years, with the same care she showed everyone else. The creature chittered at her, mandibles clicking in what might have been gratitude or might have been a threat. She responded in its language, which sounded like gravel being crushed, and it settled down. You speak razor? I asked after she'd moved on. I speak 17 languages, medical necessity. She was checking on an Alith soldier who'd lost part of his ear in an explosion. The ear was regenerating, slowly, new tissue growing in crystalline patterns. If I cannot communicate with my patients, I cannot treat them effectively. But they're the enemy. She turned to look at me, and her expression was patient but firm. They are injured. That is the only designation that matters in this place. The moment someone crosses into my medical zone, they stop being enemy or ally. They become my responsibility. That's a nice philosophy. Doesn't make it less strange to watch you save someone who was probably shooting at humans yesterday. And I watched you help carry supplies yesterday despite being barely mobile yourself. You assisted moving a wounded razor to a bed because he was in pain and you were available. Her ears tilted forward. Do not pretend you are less idealistic than you are. It's unconvincing. She had a point. When someone was screaming in pain, species didn't really factor into the immediate response. You helped. That was just basic decency. I started making myself useful against Kelris's protests. She insisted I should rest, let my body finish healing. I insisted that sitting around while people suffered wasn't actually restful. We compromised. I could help with basic tasks, but nothing that required heavy lifting or rapid movement. Turned out there was plenty to do. Medical supplies needed organizing. Equipment needed basic maintenance. Patients needed water, food, someone to talk to during the long hours when pain made sleep impossible. I became a fixture in the biostructure, the human with the limp who could usually make the wounded smile despite everything. Kelris and I developed a rhythm. She'd be working on a patient, need something, and I'd have it ready before she asked. I'd be helping someone sit up to eat, and she'd appear with medication adjusted for that specific patient's metabolism. We didn't talk much during the busy periods. There wasn't time, but we didn't need to. Understanding happened in glances, in the tilt of her ears, in the way she hummed softly when she was concentrating. I learned things about her in fragments. She'd been a medic for 11 years, having started young even by Aelith standards. Her people were neutral in the war until 6 months ago, when a Razor attack destroyed a medical ship that had been treating refugees. The ship had been clearly marked, its non-combatant status unambiguous. 300 Aelith medics and support staff died. The attack violated every treaty, every rule of warfare, she told me one night during a rare quiet period. We were sitting outside the biostructure, watching Threshold 7's 2 moons rise over the scarred landscape. My government could not ignore it, but we did not join the war as warriors. We joined as healers. This is our contribution, to save as many as possible, regardless of which side they fight for. That's either very noble or very naive, I said. It can be both. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that was startlingly human. I am under no illusion that healing will end this war. But perhaps if enough soldiers on all sides see that we value every life equally, they will question why they are fighting in the first place. You're trying to end a war through aggressive compassion. Is there a better strategy? I thought about that. Thought about the years of fighting, the friends I'd lost, the reasons for the war that had become increasingly abstract the longer it dragged on. Maybe not. She looked at me, and in the moonlight her eyes seemed to glow faintly. You think I am foolish. I think you're optimistic. There's a difference. I shifted, my healing leg protesting. I also think you're one of the best people I've ever met, which is saying something since we've known each other for maybe 2 weeks, and you've seen me at my absolute worst. Her ears did something complicated, folding and unfolding in a pattern I couldn't read. You were not at your worst. You were injured and frightened and still making terrible jokes. That seems quite typical for you. Fair assessment. We sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the moons and listening to the distant sounds of artillery fire that never quite stopped. War didn't pause just because people needed to heal. Inside the biostructure, someone called for Kelris. She stood immediately, her moment of rest over. Duty continues. Duty continues, I agreed, following her back inside. A new wave of casualties arrived just before dawn. A skirmish at one of the forward positions had gone wrong, and the wounded flooded in faster than the staff could process them. I helped where I could, moving between beds, applying pressure to wounds until Kelris or one of her team could get there, talking to the ones who were conscious and terrified. A human corporal grabbed my arm, his grip weak. Am I going to die? I looked at his injuries, shrapnel wounds, bad but not immediately lethal if treated quickly. Not today. The medic here is too stubborn to let you. Accurate, Kelris said, appearing beside me with her hands already glowing. Sullivan, I need you to keep his attention focused. Talk to him about anything. His home, his family, his favorite food. I do not care what, just keep him present. So I talked. Told the corporal about Earth, about a restaurant I knew in Portland that made the best fish tacos in the known universe. Made up increasingly absurd details about the chef's secret recipe that involved ethically sourced moon crystals and water blessed by confused dolphins. Kept talking even when Kelris was doing things that made the corporal scream. Kept talking until his breathing steadied and the immediate crisis passed. When she finished, her hands were shaking with exhaustion. We'd been at this for 6 hours straight. You need to rest, I told her, after the next patient. Kelris, she looked at me, And I saw it then. The weight she was carrying, the impossible burden of trying to save everyone while knowing she couldn't. Her ears were drooping, her shoulders tight with stress that had nowhere to go. 5 minutes, I said. Sit down for 5 minutes. Your team can handle things. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. For a moment, I thought she'd argue. Then she nodded just once and sat on an empty bed. I brought her water, which she drank mechanically. We didn't talk. She just sat there, breathing, letting herself be still for the first time in hours. Then she stood, her ears lifting back into alert position, and returned to work. I watched her move through the biostructure, this alien woman who had saved my life and countless others, who fought death with the same determination that soldiers fought enemies, and I realized something that probably should have worried me more than it did. I was falling for her, not in the dramatic, love-at-first-sight way, in the slow, inevitable way of recognizing someone whose soul somehow aligned with yours, someone who made you want to be better just by existing near them, which was spectacularly bad timing, given that we were in the middle of a war zone and belonged to different species, and would probably never see each other again, once I was evacuated back to human medical facilities. But the heart, as it turns out, doesn't particularly care about logistics. So I kept helping, kept making her smile when I could, kept being present for whatever time we had left. It was all I could offer, and somehow it felt like enough. 3 weeks into my recovery, I could walk without limping and lift supply crates without my abdomen threatening to split open. Kelris declared me adequately repaired, though still inadvisably reckless, which I took as high praise. The biostructure had become my world. I knew every patient's name, every staff member's routine, which supplies were running low and which equipment was temperamental. I'd become the unofficial liaison between human casualties and ALIC medical staff, translating not just language but cultural expectations about pain management and recovery timelines. Kelris and I had settled into something that felt like partnership. She'd be elbow-deep in surgery, need a specific tool, and I'd have it ready. I'd be helping a patient through a panic attack, and she'd appear with the right medication without being asked. We developed our own shorthand, our own rhythm that made the impossible workload almost manageable. "You should have been a medic," she told me one afternoon while teaching me how to calibrate the bone-knitting device. Her hands guided mine, showing me the precise angle and pressure needed. "I'm decent with explosives and fixing comm arrays. That doesn't translate to healing people. You are decent with compassion and remaining calm in crisis. That translates perfectly." She stepped back, watching me work. "You have good hands, steady. Many engineers are too rough, too focused on the mechanical. You understand that tools are merely extensions of intent." That's weirdly philosophical for a medical lesson. Her ears tilted, and what I'd learned was amusement. Healing is philosophy made practical. Every treatment is an argument that life is worth preserving. And you've never lost that argument. Her expression shifted, becoming distant. "I lose frequently. A child died 2 days before we found you. Shrapnel wound to the chest, damage too extensive even with our technology. I worked for 4 hours trying to save her." She paused, and when she spoke again her voice was quieter. I held her hand as she died and told her she was brave. It was all I could offer. I'd seen Kelris emotional exactly once. A brief moment when she thought no one was watching, standing outside the biostructure with her ears flat against her head and her shoulders shaking. She'd composed herself within minutes and returned to work. "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate words for an inadequate situation. "Sorry accomplishes nothing. Learning accomplishes something." I reviewed everything about that case, identified 3 points where different decisions might have changed the outcome. "Next time I will be better." She turned back to the equipment. "This is how I honor her. By being better for the next patient." She was, I realized, the most disciplined person I'd ever met. Not in the military sense of following orders, but in the deeper sense of having principles and refusing to compromise them regardless of cost. We were interrupted by alarms, the perimeter warning that meant incoming wounded. Everyone moved instantly into organized chaos, preparing beds and equipment while Kelris reviewed the preliminary medical data being transmitted ahead. Multiple casualties, she announced. Mixed species. Primary injuries appear to be from plasma weapons and explosive decompression. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes. The wounded arrived in waves, carried by combat medics who looked barely better off than their patients. I helped triage, directing the less critical cases to the outer beds, while the serious injuries went straight to Kelris and her senior staff. One of the human soldiers being carried in locked eyes with me and grinned through his obvious pain. "Sullivan, you're alive, you beautiful disaster." "Cortez." I stared at my squad mate, taking in his burned armor and the field dressing that was barely containing whatever damage lay underneath. "What the hell happened?" "Razors hit the western battery. We got most of them, but—" He gestured weakly at himself. "Plasma burns, pretty ones too." Kelris was already there, scanning him with her portable device. Second-degree plasma burns covering approximately 30% of body surface. Manageable but painful. You will need to remain here for at least a week. She looked at me. "This is a friend." "Squad mate, one of the good ones." "Then I have additional motivation to do excellent work." She smiled at Cortez with that warm expression I'd seen her use on frightened patients. "Your friend talks about you frequently. Apparently you make something called real coffee that is significantly better than military rations." "Damn right I do," Cortez said. "When I'm mobile again, I'll make you a cup." "I look forward to it." She began working, her hands glowing as she treated the burns with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. Over the next few hours, I helped process the new casualties while catching up with Cortez and other members of my unit who'd been brought in. Hearing their stories, I pieced together what had been happening while I recovered. The war was intensifying. Territory changed hands weekly. Casualties were mounting on all sides. "Command thinks the Razors are planning something big," Cortez told me during a moment when the pain medication made him talkative. "One final push to take Threshold 7 completely. If they succeed, they control the entire sector. And if they don't, then we've been bleeding each other for nothing for 3 years, and maybe someone finally admits this whole thing is pointless." He looked around the biostructure, at the mix of species all in various states of injury. Though I guess some people already figured that out. That night, Kelris found me outside, staring at the stars and trying not to think about the implications of everything Cortez had said. She sat beside me without speaking, her presence comfortable in the way that some silences are. "You are worried about the coming battle," she said eventually. "Is it that obvious? Your shoulders get tight when you are stressed. You also stop making jokes, which is deeply concerning given how terrible they usually are." I huffed something that might have been a laugh. "The terrible jokes are all I've got." "You have compassion, stubbornness, and surprisingly capable hands for someone who claims not to be a medic. Those qualities are rarer than humor." She paused. "You are also afraid. Terror is a reasonable response to the situation." "Yes, but you are not afraid of dying. You are afraid of leaving." She turned to look at me, her large eyes reflecting starlight. "You have made a home here in this place of suffering. You have found purpose in helping. The thought of returning to your unit, to being a soldier instead of a healer, troubles you." She wasn't wrong. The thought of picking up a rifle again, of going back to a world where the goal was destruction rather than preservation, felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. "I don't know if I can go back to what I was," I admitted. "Then perhaps you do not go back. Perhaps you go forward to what you are becoming." Her ears tilted forward. "My people have a saying. The seeds that survive the fire grow into trees that know how to weather flames. You have survived your fire, Sullivan. What you grow into now is your choice. That's assuming I survive the next fire." "You will." Because I will be very annoyed if my excellent medical work is wasted on someone who immediately gets themselves killed. She said it lightly, but there was something underneath, genuine concern that she was trying to hide behind humor. I looked at her, this alien woman who had saved my life and somehow become the center of my world, and wanted to say 1,000 things that I didn't have the courage to voice. That she'd changed something fundamental in me. That watching her work had shown me what strength actually looked like. That I didn't want to leave this place because leaving meant leaving her. Instead, I said, "Thank you for everything." She smiled, understanding more than I'd said. "You are welcome for everything." We sat there until duty called us back inside, until the needs of the wounded pulled us away from the quiet moment. But something had shifted between us, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended species and circumstance. Inside the biostructure, the work continued. Patients needed care. Lives needed saving. And Kelris and I moved through it together, two people from different worlds who had somehow found the same purpose in the chaos. I didn't know what would happen when the coming battle arrived. Didn't know if I'd survive, if she'd survive, if any of us would make it through whatever the Razors were planning. But I knew that for however long we had, I would stand beside her, would help her save as many as possible, would be the person she'd helped me become, someone who chose compassion over convenience, who valued life over victory, who understood that healing was its own form of courage. And if that was all I could offer, it would be enough. The attack came at dawn, which was tactically sound and personally inconvenient. I was helping Kelris inventory medical supplies when the first explosions shook the biostructure, the living walls rippling with the impact. "That's close," Cortez said from his bed. He was mobile now, mostly healed but still officially a patient. Kelris was already moving, pulling up tactical displays on her holographic interface. "Razor forces, approximately battalion strength. They are advancing directly toward this position. Medical facilities are protected under the threshold accords," one of her staff members said, his ears flat with fear. "They cannot attack us." "The Razors violated medical protection protocols when they destroyed our ship," Kelris said, her voice calm despite the situation. "They have demonstrated they do not honor such rules. We must prepare for the possibility of direct assault." Captain Okonkwo's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "All medical personnel, begin evacuation procedures. Combat units are establishing a defensive perimeter, but we may not be able to hold them off long enough." Kelris looked around at her patients, humans, Aelith, even 2 recovering Razors who'd been captured and treated. Some were mobile, most weren't. Moving them would mean abandoning the equipment keeping them alive, the careful balance of medications and treatments that were all that stood between them and death. "No," she said simply. Her second-in-command stared at her. "Commander Kelris, we must evacuate. Moving the critical patients will kill them. I will not sacrifice them to save myself." Her ears were rigid, her posture radiating absolute determination. "We stay, we continue treatment. We trust that the defensive lines will hold." "And if they don't?" I asked. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw fear and resolve in equal measure. "Then we defend our patients. This is a medical facility. That makes everyone here non-combatants under our care. We protect them." "With what?" Cortez had limped over, his hand on my shoulder. "Kelris, I respect what you do here, but you're healers, not soldiers." "Then we will improvise." She turned to me. "Sullivan, you are trained in combat engineering and defensive systems. Can we fortify this structure?" My mind was already running through possibilities. The biostructure wasn't designed for combat, but it was surprisingly robust. The perimeter had equipment, supplies, things that could be repurposed, and I had knowledge of how to make things explode in useful ways. Give me anyone who's mobile enough to help in 30 minutes. I can give us a fighting chance. "You are still recovering," she said. "So is everyone else. Doesn't change what needs to be done." I looked at Cortez, and the other recovering soldiers who were already getting to their feet despite their injuries. We're not letting them take this place. What followed was controlled chaos. I directed the mobile patients and medical staff in creating defensive positions, using equipment crates for cover, and setting up perimeter alarms from repurposed medical sensors. Cortez, despite his burns, helped me rig explosive charges from medical plasma cutters and power cells, crude but effective if used correctly. Kelris worked through it all, moving between her defensive preparations and her patients, refusing to let the crisis interrupt treatment. I watched her stabilize a human soldier's collapsed lung while artillery fire shook the walls, her hands steady as if she was working in perfect peace. "You're terrifying when you're focused," I told her during a brief moment when we crossed paths. "You are terrifying when you are building explosives from medical equipment. We complement each other." She handed me a device that looked like a scanner. "This can detect Razor biosignatures at 50 meters. Use it to know when they are approaching." "Where did you get military detection equipment?" "I am resourceful. Also, you are not the only one who can improvise during crisis." Her ears tilted forward with something that might have been amusement or might have been terror. She squeezed my hand briefly. "Try not to die. I would find it very inconvenient." "Same to you." The Razors hit the perimeter 20 minutes later. I heard them before I saw them, the distinctive chittering of their communication mixed with plasma weapons fire. Coalition forces were holding the outer defensive line, but the Razors were pushing hard, accepting casualties that would have made human commanders blanch. They were trying to break through, trying to take the medical facility, either as leverage or to eliminate coalition wounded. The tactical logic was sound even if it violated every rule of warfare humanity had spent centuries developing. The first Razor to breach our perimeter came through the eastern wall, its plasma weapon scanning for targets. Cortez took it down with a shot from a liberated rifle, the bug-like creature collapsing with a shriek. "They're testing our defenses," I called out. "Next wave will be bigger." I was right. 6 more came through, coordinated and fast. We held them with the defensive positions I'd established, with the makeshift explosives I'd rigged to create choke points. But more kept coming, and we were running out of ammunition and patience. Kelris never stopped working. While Razors tried to breach her facility, she continued treating patients, her hands glowing as she worked. One of her staff members was hit by plasma fire, and she dragged him to safety herself, treating his wounds even as energy bolts scorched the air around her. "Kelris, get down!" I shouted as another wave approached. "I have a patient in the middle of organ regeneration. I cannot stop now or he will die, so I suggest you prevent them from reaching this bed." Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if this was a reasonable request and not insanity. So I did. With Cortez and 3 other mobile soldiers, we held the eastern approach while she worked. Held it through plasma fire and explosions, through the sound of chittering Razors and screaming wounded, through minutes that felt like hours. The device Kelris had given me shrieked a warning. "Massive biosignature incoming. Razor-heavy assault unit, the kind that required specialized weapons to take down." We didn't have specialized weapons. We had determination and improvised explosives. "Fall back to secondary positions," I ordered. "Cortez, get ready to trigger the charges." The assault unit burst through the wall like it was paper, its armored carapace deflecting our small arms fire. It was heading straight for the critical care beds, where patients lay helpless. I didn't think. Just moved, positioning myself between the unit and Kelris, who was still working on her patient with impossible focus. The unit's weapon systems targeted me, energy building for a shot that would vaporize everything in a 3-meter radius. Kelris's hand touched my back. "Together," she said. Her other hand pressed against the floor, and the biostructure responded. Walls shifted, growing and moving with organic speed, wrapping around the assault unit and constraining its movement. She was using the facility itself as a weapon, turning its living structure against the threat. Now, she shouted. Cortez triggered the charges. The explosives I'd rigged went off in sequence, each blast directed and focused by the positioning I'd chosen. The assault unit's armor cracked, and it went down shrieking. The attack ended as suddenly as it began. Coalition reinforcements broke through, driving the Razors back in a counterattack that sent the remaining enemy forces retreating. The perimeter stabilized. The immediate crisis passed. I stood there, adrenaline fading, and realized I was bleeding from somewhere, probably several somewheres. The specifics weren't immediately clear. Sullivan. Kelris was in front of me, her scanner already out, assessing damage. You are injured. Bit of shrapnel, nothing dramatic. There is a metal fragment embedded 3 centimeters from your femoral artery. If it shifts, you will bleed out in minutes. I would classify that as dramatic. Her hands were shaking now that the crisis had passed, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving behind exhaustion and fear. You nearly died. Again. This is becoming an unpleasant pattern. Sorry for the inconvenience. You are not sorry. You would do it again. She was working while she talked, removing the shrapnel with practiced efficiency despite her shaking hands. You are reckless and stubborn, and you nearly got yourself killed protecting my patients. Our patients, I corrected. And you're the one who stood there doing surgery while Razors were shooting at you. That is different. I was doing my job. So was I. She finished treating the wound, but she didn't move away. Just stood there, close enough that I could see her ears trembling with emotion she was trying to contain. I thought you would die, she said quietly. When that assault unit targeted you, I thought I would watch you die, and I realized that would be unbearable. I reached up, gently touching one of her long ears. She leaned into the contact, her eyes closing briefly. I'm still here. You saved me again. We saved each other. She opened her eyes. This is very inconvenient timing for emotional revelation. Yeah, the middle of a war zone isn't ideal for this conversation. No, it is not. She took a breath. But I must say it anyway. You have become important to me. More important than is wise given our circumstances. And I am grateful you survived and angry that you risked yourself, and terrified that next time I will not be fast enough to prevent your death. Kelris, I am not finished. Her ears were rigid now, determined. When this war ends, if we both survive, I want you to find me. I want to continue this, whatever this is. I want to see if what we have built here, in the worst possible place, can exist somewhere better. I cupped her face in my hands, her skin warm and smooth. I don't want to wait for the war to end. Then what do you want? This, you. Every moment we can steal until they ship me out. I smiled despite everything. I'm choosing you, Kelris, for however long we have. She kissed me then, and it was gentle and fierce all at once. Her lips tasted like the medical compound she used on patients, and something sweet I couldn't identify. Her long ears wrapped partially around my head in what I would later learn was a deeply intimate gesture for her people. When we broke apart, the biostructure was still standing, our patients were alive, and the world hadn't ended despite trying very hard to do so. I have many injured to treat, she said, but didn't move away. I should help. You should rest, you nearly died again. We've established I'm bad at resting. She laughed, the sound weary but genuine. Yes, you are terrible at it. This is one of your less endearing qualities. We went back to work, treating wounded, stabilizing patients, rebuilding what had been damaged. Coalition Command was evacuating non-critical personnel, but Kelris and her core team were staying, as were those of us too injured to return to combat duty immediately. 2 days later, I was cleared for transport to rear area medical facilities for final recovery before returning to my unit. Kelris walked me to the evacuation shuttle, our hands linked in a way that had become natural. This is not goodbye, she said firmly. This is temporary separation. I know. I pulled out a small data chip. My contact information, service record, everything you'd need to find me when this is over. She handed me a crystal, similar to the ones that powered her medical equipment but smaller, more personal. It pulsed with soft blue light. This is programmed with my biosignature. Any Aelith communication system can use it to locate me. Hold on to it. I will. And Sullivan, her ears tilted forward, do not die between now and our next meeting. I have invested significant time and resources in keeping you alive. It would be wasteful to lose that investment. I'll do my best. She kissed me one more time, and I boarded the shuttle with the crystal clutched in my hand like a lifeline. From the viewport, I watched the biostructure grow smaller, watched Kelris return to her work, watched the place that had become home despite being a war zone fade into distance. But I had the crystal, had the promise of a future beyond the war, had the memory of her smile and her impossible compassion, and her complete refusal to let anyone die if she could prevent it. 3 weeks later, in a human military hospital,